The D&D movie is great. I recommend people see it. But it's also not a big, massive hit in the box office, which makes me concerned for the future of D&D as a tabletop game. I think it is becoming much more likely now that Wizards of the Coast will try to aggressively monetize the tabletop game. First of all, was it a flop, the movie? Not by conventional standards. It looks like it's may not break even, but it wouldn't be a flop. It has made about $62 million domestically after its second weekend, about $126 million worldwide. And with a production budget of $150 million, according to my very limited amount of research and reading these comments, it looks like making your production budget within the first 2 weeks means you'll break even as a whole if you consider the cost of marketing and the fact that your returns are not just about box office sales, but also merchandising, DVDs, and streaming. But we know that Wizards of the Coast had ambitious plans telling their investors that they were going to grow their profits 50% over the next 3 years. This is something that they have been saying since last October. It's the goal of their Blueprint 2.0, in which, if you look at this press release, I'll leave a link, they have a number of initiatives that includes shuttering some brands, focusing the resources on D&D, Magic the Gathering, a few high-return brands, and they really promote the idea, especially in their fireside chat held in late November of last year, where they said that D&D was under-monetized, that there's a lot of profit, a lot of revenue to be had that is untapped in the D&D brand. And they talked about 4 quadrants, one of them being the tabletop RPG, another being movies and television, and one being video games, and the other being toys and merchandise. And a lot was riding in their assurance call to investors who are panicking about the stock falling and Bank of America downgrading Hasbro as an investment for its mismanagement of Magic the Gathering. They were giving assurances to their investors that D&D was basically the hope for the company's profits growing and meeting this goal. Now, Wizards of the Coast, as was now been made clear, was hoping to, as part of their profit plan, to shut down third-party competitors and to monopolize more the TTRPG space with their draft OGL that they ended up not going forward with. The storm has calmed. People's trust in Wizards of the Coast has probably not been restored, but there is a glimmer of hope at the moment, given public statements by Kyle Brink and other representatives of Wizards of the Coast. I think that was basically just a holding pattern. I think that they have not made any real decisions on what they want to do with a pricing plan for the VTT and D&D Beyond. I think that they have been waiting to see what trajectory the D&D movie was going to put D&D's money-making potential. Now, I want to recommend that people see Dungeons and Discourse's recent video about this, but she basically makes the point that I'm about to make, that the movie not being a breakout hit means we're going to be looking at much more aggressive monetization of D&D. And also, not to sell myself short, this is kind of one of my predictions that I made back in December 29th, and I'm going to watch myself and react to myself, which I admit is kind of weird, but whatever. So this is a stream I did December 29th, before the whole OGL scandal broke out, predicting 3 different scenarios, each of which has a different level of success by which the movie and the video game were driving people to play D&D, the game. So these are like 3 scenarios. There's the things stay the same, and the movie and the video game are not that successful, so they try to milk D&D Beyond like they've been trying to milk Magic the Gathering and strain the current player base. They grow to some extent and they don't feel that same pressure, or they vastly outgrow and have a new influx of TTRPG players that they say to hell with it to the current player base. So those are my that's my prognosis, those 3 scenarios. So, and that last one was because there'd be so many people coming to play D&D who don't have the same expectation of that we, the older generation, have of not having to pay to get a subclass or buy a module to run the game. That those people without that tradition could be monetized much more easily and vastly outnumber the current player base. So with the D&D movie not being a breakout hit, which, to be honest, I kind of thought was going to happen, I don't think that Chris Cox, CEO of Hasbro, his argument to investors that there was this huge potential growth in D&D because when you bring up the name at cocktail parties, people will recognize what you're talking about. I didn't think that that was necessarily going to translate into making a Marvel-like movie franchise or Star Wars cinematic universe, something like that. The appeal of D&D is not necessarily the characters and stories that are well established that people know. D&D is a game, as opposed to Lord of the Rings, which was kind of a story and kind of makes clear what it's about and will get people to watch movies about it. Dungeons & Dragons doesn't necessarily guarantee that. And it was kind of clear that they're going to try to go for a comedy action Guardians of the Galaxy kind of approach to market it. Like, here's a very funny genre themed movie that you can come and be entertained by. But it seems like the market is not as ready for that to happen in a fantasy setting, which the mainstream might still associate with ponderous, epic, serious stories like Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. But even if the movie had been a breakout mainstream hit, that translating into people playing the game, I'm not sure that was going to happen either, or that will happen. Because you play D&D not to be a passive observer of an epic story. You do it to be the story. And in fact, I think the movie did the best job it could in kind of conveying the improvisatory, fun, spontaneous way stories can be told in the medium. But to be honest, I think that Stranger Things does a better job getting people to want to check out the game, because people associate and see those characters playing the game as opposed to seeing a story set in the game, if that makes sense. The fact that the movie is as good as it is as a movie and stays true to the spirit of D&D and what it's like to play a game of D&D while not being a big financial success, that combination of things doesn't bode well for the future of D&D to be a huge money-making brand. And we now combine that with Hasbro not doing very well. This is from February 16th. This is their official press release, where basically they open with how their profits have gone down year over year, 9% for the full year of 2022 compared to 2021. And for the fourth quarter, it went down 17%. And they have a lot of things that they point to as a silver lining, including, first and foremost, the movie. Also, meanwhile, the stocks continue to go down. This was November when B of A downgraded it, and they have not seen a change in the direction of their stock. So with all this said, and the fact that they still promise a profit growth of 50% over the next 3 years, they kind of are now running out of avenues to reach that goal. And it is becoming increasingly clear that one untapped way to do that is to try to make a version of D&D that can be monetized like big video games are. That what Cynthia Williams, CEO of Wizards of the Coast, said in the Fireside Chat last November, a recurrent spending environment, making that happen with the digital game of D&D. So they're heavily promoting this VTT. And at the Creator Summit, where Wizards flew people in, all expenses paid, to talk with the developers and at Wizards of the Coast, when asked questions about what pricing plan will be used for this VTT, they did not have any answers. And I think, one, they don't want to be honest about it, about their actual intentions. And two, I think they honestly don't have answers yet as to what they actually will do. I think they were still in a holding pattern because the movie returns still had not come back yet. So the victory against WOTC in January, forcing them to publish their rules under the Creative Commons, wasn't a change of heart by Wizards of the Coast. In fact, the language used by the CEO, Chris Cox, to investors was to say that they misfired on updating their open gaming license, which is a word you use when you say you messed up, yes, but also that you have a plan you still are trying to execute. Now, they are making a new edition, despite them now saying it is no longer called 1D&D and that it is simply called 5th edition, which is kind of ridiculous, which I might make a video about. Now, my prediction that they will not publish that an SRD of the new rules, that is now, I'm not going to say 100% that's going to happen, but I think it is more likely now. Another route is that they put it out under the Creative Commons, but then rely on the VTT alone and what it offers, and hope that that will draw a much greater number of people into the game and paying for the VTT. What's also not clear is how quickly they will aggressively monetize. It might be a more insidious and therefore effective onboarding of people. And as Stephen Glicker of Roll for Combat has said, he knows people who are working on the VTT and says that Wizards has spent $200 to $300 million on engineers to develop this VTT. And he says that's not an amount you spend without a big plan to monetize, which makes complete sense. So it's not a question of whether they'll do it, but how and to what degree. On another front, on the design of the new edition, we have not seen much progress in giving tools to DMs to balance their games or run high-level campaigns. They've been moving at a glacial pace, and it's possible, one scenario, an explanation for this, is that they've been in kind of a holding pattern to see how far they want to go with a new revision. D&D's growth as a brand, or lack thereof as a result of the movie and video game this year, could very well be a front and center consideration of how far they want to revise the game. Their increasing desperation as a company to meet that 50% increase in profit in a few years could very well mean that they try to do some innovations that many players and DMs especially have badly wanted in the system to address some long-standing issues. I think it's been in a holding pattern. We are now 8 months in since they announced it and started the playtesting process, and we have not seen any clear or any examples about how they hope to improve some long-standing problems in the game, like martial classes not being interesting, tools for dungeon masters to run their game more easily, especially with encounter building. There has been an announcement of providing prices for magic items, which sounds promising. However, it's going to be of limited use if everything else in the game is still essentially the same. There's still a lot of issues with the current engine that especially dungeon masters experience. I want to include a timestamp to something that I learned recently watching the DM Blair and his talk with Roll for Combat, which is that what prompted the new edition was not the designers having an idea of how to improve the game, but it was a way to take over D&D Beyond. Basically, D&D Beyond had the rights to provide support to the game for 5th edition into perpetuity. And that was an obstacle to Wizards of the Coast wanting to be that online platform for the game. And therefore, Wizards of the Coast told D&D Beyond, sell your company to us because we're going to put out a new edition that you will not have the rights to give digital support to. And it was this plan to put out a new edition of the game that led to the sale. And Stephen Glicker knows a number of the people who were involved, and I generally trust what it says. It all seems to be consistent with the growing picture that we're all seeing of what Wizards plans to do. And everything that D&D Shorts disclosed, what was leaked to him about how much D&D is banking on the VTT and monopolizing the VTT space to monetize D&D. In the heartless world of finance, if they can make 5 times more money from a consumer who's playing this game, on their VTT and they lose 50% of their current player base, that is a net gain. Now, whether they'll succeed financially in monetizing the VTT is a whole other question. I'm actually skeptical that they can because of what D&D is. It looks like a fun and useful tool, but it doesn't necessarily translate into people wanting to spend a lot more money to play a game that essentially is in people's imaginations. But that's a discussion for another day. So that's it. I don't have a big call to action. I'm just indicating where I think things are going. Basically, the news is that of the various timelines we could be looking at is one where they try to milk the current player base. However, they can do that. If that's the VTT, if that's publishing the new rules under a restrictive license and shutting out third-party publishers, if that is charging people to play certain subclasses or classes or various cosmetics in the VTT, they will do that. And it's not a matter of whether, but when. So I 100% stand with the people that are vocal online who are saying they're trying out other systems or are continuing to play D&D but not gonna go with WOTC. Will continue to use the books and resources they already have or go with a system that tries to carry the torch of the system. I will continue to cover D&D as well as highlight Pathfinder 2e, my preferred system. So if you are interested in that, like and subscribe. Also check out my videos that I'll link to in a playlist at the end of this video covering the OGL debacle and giving my design comments on the next edition of D&D. So that's it. I've been the Rules Lawyer, and I will see you next time.